Hi, I'm rickdior, and I'm practicing there. I'm practicing playing some different stuff over this hi-hat pattern. I've been working on that for a few weeks, and today's lesson is going to be about practicing, how I practice, how I tell my students to practice, and how you can work on things and really use your time in the best way. So let's just tell you a little about how I started and how I used to practice when I was young. My mother used to tell me that when I had drum lessons in the beginning, I was very, very young, I would run and hide under the bed because I didn't want to do it, and I wouldn't practice. Now, I don't remember that, and I could not imagine that, but I think it's probably because my first teacher wasn't very good. But eventually I got a really great teacher named Jack Winters, and he was fantastic. And this is when I was about maybe 11 years old, 10 or 11 years old, and that changed everything for me, because then I wanted to practice because he was giving me really good stuff to do, fun stuff. I saw improvement right away, and I really started to enjoy practicing. And eventually, you know, my mom used to have to come out to the garage and drag me inside at 12 midnight so the neighbors wouldn't call the police. So I became kind of a practicing addict where I was just playing as much as I could all day, every day. And I still love to practice. I love to play. So the idea is to learn how to practice and to use your time well, but also to understand that there's a method to practicing that will get you a lot farther than if you don't use any kind of method for practicing. In other words, if you're not organized, if you don't know what to practice, if you don't know how or when to practice, then you're going to have some issues. So the first thing that I like to talk to my students about is time management. So all of us have things that we have to do throughout the day. Some of us are younger, so we don't really have a lot of obligations just going to school and eating and sleeping. Some of us have jobs and we have to go to work, and then we have families and we have all these things. So everybody's going to have a different amount of time they can practice and put it into these kinds of things. But there's a few things that you should always practice. And one of them is technique. So you should always do something every day to either maintain your technique or improve your technique. So I'm a big stickler for this, and that's something I always have my students do. The first thing you want to do when you're practicing, even if it's for 5 minutes, is always warm up. And I'm a big believer in that as well. I did a whole video on it, so you could look for that. I have a pretty extensive warm-up routine, but that should be a part of your practicing every time you sit behind a drum kit or any instrument that you play. So once you do that, then you have to have goals. So my goals are pretty big these days, unless I have a concert I'm getting ready for, which right now, not really because of COVID, there's not much going on. So, but normally, if the orchestra's playing and I have a lot of sessions going on, I'm always learning new music. I'm spending pretty much 3/4 of my practice time learning music. Because with the orchestra, a lot of times we have 3 different shows a week. So we have a pile of music we have to get through. But right now, I don't have that. So I've been practicing a lot. And it's actually great. I haven't been able to practice like this in literally 30 years. Since I was, in my 20s, I haven't been able to sit down and really work on something. So I'm really, really enjoying that process of doing that. So let's say you have an hour that you can practice. Well, I would say do the first 20 minutes just working on your hands. And we're talking to drummers here now. Any instrument is relative to this. We could talk about working on your scales or your embouchure or your tuning if you play other instruments. So you want to do that. Those are what I call the fundamental techniques of playing. So any kind of hand technique, books, stick control, master studies, my books, any of those books will work great for that. And then you want to spend some time, maybe about 10 minutes, working on applying those things. So you might work on a particular etude every week. If you're studying, your teacher will give you goals, will give you etudes to work on. So every week I expect my students to be able to play these things. And then they're basically climbing up the ladder. They're doing more and more difficult things every week. Now, if you're not working with a teacher, that's difficult because you have to be your own policeman. You have to, police yourself that you have to work on these things every day. And a lot of times folks will lose focus and just sit down at the drums and start just jamming out or whatever. Well, you can do that, but eventually you're just going to play the same stuff over and over again because that's how our minds work. You need to be fed new material to become creative. And different people are at different levels of creativity. So the most important thing you need to remember is to be organized. And every day have a goal. And every week have a bigger goal. And, I'm not saying to have a goal for a year, but I have goals that go for 2 months. Like, I want to be able to play this at this tempo, or I want to be able to learn this whole book in 2 months. I do that stuff all the time. So those are good for you to realize. Goals are great. And every day you should have some sort of goal. Maybe it's 4 bars of a piece you're working on, something like that. Now, as far as technique, you can have goals of tempo. So you can just kind of raise that metronome 1 click a week. That's a lot because in a month, it'll be 4 clicks faster and you'll be able to maintain that speed, okay? So these are all ways to think about practicing. Now, if you're doing multiple instruments, like I play a lot of instruments, I play marimba and all the can drums and timpani and just orchestra stuff, and it's endless. So I might want to learn a marimba piece, and I might spend 2 weeks on doing that. So that would be 2 hours of my practice time, of my 4-hour practice time. I would do that for 2 hours a day. And then the rest would be the normal drum set or anything else. I normally only have one big goal. I don't like to overwhelm myself. So if I'm working on a new marimba piece or something a student's learning that I need to know, I always try to learn the pieces that my students learn so I know what the hell's going on. So when I'm doing that, I'll kind of lighten up on my other goals. Okay, but for those of you who are just playing drum set, what I recommend is warming up for 20 minutes. Let's say you have an hour, okay? 20 minutes warming up. Now that consists of doing hand exercises, so that is a bit technical, and that goes into that thing too. And then I like my students to do some rudimental etudes. I'm a big believer in those, as you know, and all that stuff works great on the drum set as well. So then that's maybe 10 minutes. So then you're at a half hour. Now you got another half hour left. So what I would suggest, if you only have an hour, is just work on one style of music. So if you're working on a rock thing or a funk thing or a Latin thing, stick with that for that half hour on that particular day. Okay? So let's say you want to learn to play, a mambo. And you're new to it. So you'll probably have some books and some videos you watch and all that. Well, you want to start on the simplest possible thing, which is playing that cascara on the bell, which would be this. Now, what I recommend is instead of trying to add all this other stuff, put on some music right away and play just with that right hand and maybe your hi-hat with the music. So in other words, you're always playing with music. I'm a big believer in that. Don't just practice for the sake of technical practicing because you're going to end up playing music. That's why it's so important. So you need to play. So put on some old Pancho Sanchez records or there's so many things that you could put on. A medium tempo mambo, okay? Just go on Spotify and hit salsa and you'll be able to play right with that, all right? So then you do that. And then the next step would be getting that clave with the left foot. And again, once you're comfortable doing that, because that's not easy, play with some music. So in between, when you're learning all these different aspects of a groove, you play with music. And then finally, you add that left hand. Now that's the simplest of mambos, but you see that little conga pattern with my left hand. Again, learn it, go slow, and play with some music. The same thing goes with jazz. When you're learning to play jazz and you're just learning the ride pattern, right away you play with music. Just the ride by itself. Okay? You could put on, Miles Davis, Kind of Blue, John Coltrane, Blue Train. Those are great records to play with. Philly Joe's on one, Jimmy Cobb's on the other. You can't wish for any better than that. That's what you do. Just the right hand. And then you start working on coordination exercises. Now for that, you probably want to get a teacher. All right? If you're doing rock and roll, it's a little bit easier. You can just start out by doing this. I always have my students just play like AC/DC, Back in Black, And they'll play with it. It's a great tune. It's got great energy. It's slow. So I have them right off, instead of learning a bunch of beats, they play with music. So if I haven't made myself clear, you always need to be playing with some sort of music when you're practicing. Okay? Now there's lots of play-along tracks you can get. There's so many things out there now that you should be doing. But that would be my advice if you're just playing drum kit. Now let's talk about developing coordination on the drum kit, because I know a lot of you are very interested in that, and I get a lot of questions on how I develop all these things. Well, I just showed you one way, which is with that mambo rhythm, which is just adding things. But another way to do it is to do combinations of things. So in other words, if I'm trying to learn how to play some complex rhythms, in other words, some of the rhythms in my book from page 7, 8, 9, and 10, and there's a lot of rhythms in there. The first thing you need to do is learn how to read those rhythms. If you know that already, great. And then I would say, play with a click and put the hi-hat on 16ths like this. Now, you need to use a click at first on 16ths. Then, with that click, you need to record yourself. So when I was practicing a lot, 8, 9, 10 hours a day, when I lived in New York, and then when I was younger and I had a lot of time, I would rent warehouse space or whatever, practiced all day. And I would always record myself and videotape myself. And back then, it was harder to do that than it is now, trust me. So I would play it for like 10 minutes, and then I'd watch it and just scrutinize the hell out of it. I was very, very hard, and I still am, on myself. And it's important to be very critical. So by doing that over and over with lots of different things, you can reach a sort of level that's unattainable without those kinds of tools. So that particular thing I just played, which is very simple for me now, but maybe not for everybody, just doing an accented 16th note pattern. I would listen to that over and over and watch it and make sure everything looked and sounded perfect, in the pocket, grooving. And then, again, you guessed it, I'd put on some music, some Earth, Wind & Fire or Tower Power something, and I'd play along with it, and then listen again to myself playing with it and make sure it was in the pocket and that it was perfect. And I did that over and over and over again for 7 years. That's how long I practiced, for 9 hours a day. And, I loved it. I would live like a monk. I wasn't married and didn't have any obligations. I would gig at night and I'd play all day. So that was pretty much my life. And now I know not everybody can do that, but that's what I did. And I did that with every single style of music. I'd play jazz, I'd write out charts, and I would always video and record myself. So that's pretty much the most important thing as you get more advanced that you can do for your playing, is to watch yourself and listen to yourself. Now, every time you have a gig and you play with a band, do the same thing. Record yourself. Okay, video yourself if you're allowed to do that. But that's how you learn. So that's a huge part of my practicing still. I'll always record myself. So those coordination things are important, and you basically will write down a chart if you're looking to learn a particular type of thing, all right? Like let's say you want to learn left foot clave, all right? So the first thing you would do, like I did earlier, is just play 16th notes. Now that doesn't have a lot of feel, obviously, but again, when you play with the music, you would feel that. So, and then the next thing would be to do paradiddle. Then you'd add your bass drum, maybe on the bombo note, which is the second note. And I might go through all kinds of rudiments and books and play, you know, I even read classical snare drum books over that stuff to make sure that my hands can do everything. I'm going through the Cerrone book, Delacluze, you know, Mitchell Peters books, playing those etudes with clave. So I want to make sure that my body can do anything over that. And then when I get on the gig, it's easy. You can play anything over that, you know. So you never will be thinking about it. It's effortless. And that's the goal for practicing. You don't want to be on the gig trying to figure that stuff out. It needs to be ready when you play it on the gig. So you don't ever practice on a gig. You make sure if you're going to try something, it's fully developed. So I would recommend that you have a process, like I said, and let's just go to the next part of that process, which would be playing some other accents on the hi-hat. Let's say we did the first one and the last one. That's page 8, first line. So I would go through that whole page and 20 others like it. I have lots and lots of books with rhythms in them. And I would make sure I could play anything under that particular hi-hat ostinato. And it goes on and on and on. That's how you do it. So that's technical practicing. You get it? It's not very musical at first, but eventually when you play it with music, it becomes music. So at first you're learning the physical, and that becomes the organic, the musical, the thing that you can't explain. But to play those things, you need to be able to play the physical first. And of course, for jazz drumming, that's the most important thing, because that's pretty much the most complex style of drumming, to play at a very high level. There's so much coordination involved. And you just have to, you know, do one step at a time. I have plenty of videos on YouTube, and so do other jazz drummers, about you know, how to learn coordination. But the thing is, you have to know how to practice it in steps. And if you look at my jazz coordination videos, there's 4 of them. And I take you through that process of learning to play rhythms just with the left hand. So and then dividing it up between the bass drum and the snare drum. Okay, and then the hi-hat, and then, you know, it goes on and on. So that's how you do it. And that might take a year. You got to be patient. But that's how you practice, in an organized way. Now, it's very important to keep notes. So when I studied, I was very lucky to study with some amazing teachers. Like I said, the first guy, Jack Winters, Joe Morello, Fred Hinger, Walter Rosenberger. It goes on. I had 4 or 5 great teachers, and I would write down notes. Sometimes if they let me, I'd record the lessons. And I let my students record the lessons as well, because I think it's important. They wouldn't all let me do that, but most of them did. And I'd write down all kinds of notes, and you know, I was very meticulous about what we did, and so I could keep track of my progress. Now, some of you may not be that anal retentive, but if you are, it does really help if you can do that kind of thing. So I have notebooks full of lesson material. And I used that in my teaching at first, until I came up with my own way of teaching, which I thought was an improvement on what I learned when I studied. So you should try to do that. Keep notes, keep progress, keep a journal if you want to do that. Be serious about this. This is an art form. So, it's going to be, if you're serious about it, it will be your whole life, your whole life's achievement, pretty much everything.